you, Pak Muammar. Now we are moving to our fellow brother from Palestine, Khalil Bitar. So he will share his knowledge on evaluation in FCV, fragility, conflict and vulnerability context in development evaluations. So, and then moving to the stories about development in Gaza, Palestine. So, Khalil, the floor is yours now. Thank you. You have 15.
Yeah, 15 minutes. Thank you so much, Umi. I appreciate the invitation, and assalamu alaikum to all of you. Thanks to MONEV Studio, this very creative association, organization, and a project. Particularly to Umi, who is a pioneer in this field and has been contributing. I remember the first time I joined the Global Evaluation Forum. I joined the second time she was there. I remember she was in Thailand before for the first one. And she's very active in her own country, but globally as well. And this commitment, what actually contribute to having us here today, which I really appreciate. I am from Palestine, currently in Germany for my research for PhD, but I was born and raised in Palestine. Sorry, it's just some, if you could mute, please. And my focus area or the topic I'd like to discuss about today, I titled the presentation as Evaluation Under Occupation. But I will talk a little bit more about evaluation generally in conflict-affected areas and fragility as well. This presentation also informed by two main things, let's say. This is an article I published in 2015 called Evaluation Under Occupation, the role of evaluators in protecting and promoting social justice and equity in conflict-affected and fragile context. If you like to have access to it, it's a new directions for evaluation journal, but I will talk a little bit about some of the findings from this article. Also informed by the PhD research that focused on how did the Palestinian National Monitoring and Evaluation System on the government level has influenced education policy in general, but with the focus on education policy in occupied Palestinian territories, OPT. And I focus on asking if this system was really institutionalized or not, if it's contributing to promoting evidence-based policy, and how conflict and fragility have contributed to this system and its achievements. So first, a little bit of context. This is the map of Palestine. Very quickly, this part in yellow is now what is called Israel. It was occupied in 1945. And what left is the West Bank and Gaza Strip. West Bank to the right here, and Gaza Strip to the left. I am from a city called Hebron, Al-Khalil. My name is Khalil. I usually joke that the city was named after me, but it's the other way around actually. And here Jerusalem, and here the rest of the bank. Israel also occupies the Golan Heights and used to occupy part of Lebanon, here Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. In Palestine, there are two governments, unfortunately, since 2006, 2007. In the West Bank, you have the Palestinian National Authority, led by Fatah, Yasser Arafat before, and the Gaza Strip, led by Hamas. And within the West Bank, there are three areas, A, B, C, as categorized by the occupation. Actually, the West Bank and Gaza, only 22% of the whole Palestine. And 60% of this 22% is now controlled by Israel still. So it's not really a country or anything here. And in terms of governance, until 2007, the Palestinian National Authority was controlling both parts, and it's a government that is weak, of course, because it's under occupation, but controls the civil life in Palestine. Since the mid-1990s, we had the Oslo Peace Accords, by which established this governance structure in this way. And we're supposed to close in 2000 and to have a Palestinian state. But this didn't happen. Governmental infrastructure are generally have been built a lot since the 1990s. But for example, this is a picture from the airport in Gaza. It was destroyed during the Intifada, the uprising. And you have the wall that started building also around 2000, and it cuts Palestinian cities this way, like I have showed here. There's a great level of unemployment, especially in the Gaza Strip, sometimes reaching 40, 50, or sometimes more. Now with COVID is even higher. Conflict is not always continuous, but it happens from time to time, and there are many challenges because mainly our border with Egypt is closed. Gaza is a big prison. The West Bank cannot cross except for Jordan. A lot of Palestinian workers work in Israel, and some of them actually, unfortunately, work in settlements that are all over the West Bank. Palestine, maybe you'll be surprised to hear this, for many countries until recently, has had the highest per capita donor aid around the world, around $600 annually, which is the highest all around the world. Recently, of course, USAID cut aid with Trump and all of that, but still very high aid from the European Union, Arab countries, oil-rich countries, the US, Japan, and so many other donors. I know also Indonesia, support in Palestine and build infrastructures and clinics and hospitals. So a lot of solidarity also from fellow Muslim countries and population. Finally, just to say a word about what has happened now with the COVID crisis. With the COVID crisis, Palestinian territories did quite well if you compare them to so many other countries and even Israel. But that's because it's closed. Not a lot of people can get in. There are, the government could control, but unfortunately, some of the people, the labor used to work in Israel, brought a lot of the COVID with them, and now increased with 500 to 1,000, the rate of daily infection. So it's quite high now. And Israel now, it's a success story in terms of COVID vaccination, but they're not vaccinating Palestinian prisoners or Palestinians, although we are under occupation. The WHO, the World Health Organization, yesterday ruled that Israel should actually vaccinate the Palestinians, but Israel refused and said they have their own government. But we don't control our border. We don't control anything. One, in terms of natural disaster, we have big problem with water. All our water resources are controlled by Israel in Palestine. So although the country, different from Jordan, for example, or Egypt or other countries, we have a lot of water resources, but they're controlled by the occupation. So settlers will enjoy, I think, 400 meters square of a monthly or something like this, and the Palestinians don't, very, very, very small percentages. And finally, with the climate change and environmental crisis happening, there's not a lot of awareness within the Palestinian people about the climate change. Many, and I actually work on this recently, many people say, okay, we'll care about climate change after the occupation ends, because the focus is on occupation. So this is the context in general. So a little bit now about 3 key points to remember about the situation in Palestine. First, evaluators are facing a lot of methodological, ethical, and many other problems like other evaluators. But in Palestine, I already highlighted the role of the military occupation of Israel. But there is also occupation as a scapegoat. Government officials usually, unfortunately, who sometimes corrupt, who sometimes are not good, sometimes good, but they can do things. They often blame the conflict. They blame Israel, which is true in many cases, but in other cases, no, it's failure on their own. They don't admit this. So any success is due to their genius policies. Any failure, and it's a lot of it, it's because of the occupation. And evaluators, when they come and evaluate, if they don't say that, it's a big problem. Also, there are restricted access. I showed on the map, for example, here, if you are in the West Bank, you cannot go to Jerusalem. Here, you cannot even go to Jerusalem because it's a closed area. You cannot go to other areas in the West Bank. It's easier than going to Jerusalem, but still hard. There's no way to go from Gaza except for some humanitarian aid workers. In same areas in Gaza as well, sometimes they can close it, but now it's free of occupation, but it's closed as a prison. So Area C, it's not accessible to evaluators, although it is a lot of projects happen in it. So the restriction on access and mobility is huge. And finally, and this is common in many, unfortunately, developing countries, that we have lack of strong evaluation cultures. We don't have demand for evaluation within our governments and civil society organizations. Unfortunately, the donors have to request it in order for us to see its importance. This is changing, but it's not changing on any base that is strong enough to create a strong national evaluation culture. In 2013, we created the Palestinian Evaluation Association in order to help with that. We have had since then several projects working with the government on SDG monitoring before that, and now with national evaluation system. But this is a slow because the culture really does not focus on evaluation, and financial resources are limited. And now, speaking about the national evaluation system and informed by the PhD research, the theory goes like this. You have government-led national monitoring and evaluation system. This will lead to evidence-based policy, and this will lead to governance reform or good governance, whatever you want to call it. You know, all the literature talk about this, even with the fragility, conflict, and violence. The World Bank, IMF, a lot of international organizations, even academia promote that. But with my research, for example, and literature review, I found so many factors stemming from the conflict, but sometimes not necessarily directly linked to it, that lead to problems in this theory. You know, it does not happen on the ground. There's a weak sovereignty. For example, when the country does not control all the areas, the national land, they cannot implement some policies. They cannot do monitoring evaluation in certain schools. They cannot collect data. It's really, really a problem. Second, weak democracy. A Palestinian minister does not feel he is or she is accountable to the people, unfortunately. Maybe to their political parties, maybe to the president, because unfortunately we don't have elections since 2017. Hamas was elected then and refused by the international community. And then this is what happened. You know, the elections never happened again. The president stayed until then. So the minister does not necessarily feel that if he did something bad, people will not vote for him next time. And foreign aid dependency. This comes all the time in my research, that the dependency, actually foreign aid, the previous speaker, Mr. Muammar, spoke a lot about how donor aid helped in the case of Indonesia and with the recovery from tsunami and conflict affected. But in Palestine, very many studies showing that 60% of aid actually is benefiting Israel. For example, by taking taxes, by buying Israeli products, by bringing Israeli machinery, and so on. And a lot of it goes back to the donor countries. So Palestinians are benefiting only in terms of employment. For some civil society people whose salaries are higher than the government one, like 3, 4, 10 times sometimes, and they attract the best people, and unfortunately the government cannot afford this. So this is maybe superficial, but there are so many factors that I am happy to explain if I had more time, and I'm just aware that I have a couple of minutes. In addition to this, of course, we cannot ignore conflict and fragility and violence factors. They come up, But all my point is that they don't come up in the way that is often discussed in literature, in reality. Finally, I think it's already 15 minutes or so. Just want to say that you often hear the stories about Palestine and everything, but also there is, progress in terms
You
of
have 2 minutes.
development.
Sorry.
Yes, no worries. You have a lot of progress in terms of development itself. It's very resilient people, and this mentality of the resilience. Unfortunately, the previous speaker again spoke about leadership. Sometimes I feel we lack that in our own countries with leadership and everything, but people themselves are resilient. And I hope, and I know actually many from Indonesia visit Palestine often. This is Jerusalem, this is Hebron, my city, and many actually visit the two cities. But I hope that you will have the opportunity to come and visit Palestine. And I'm more than happy to answer any of the questions if you have also about this. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shukran. Thank you.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you. Thank you so much, Khalil, for a very nice presentation and also sharing about the recent situation in Gaza, in Hebron, in generally in Palestine. This is really because Indonesia have a very big concern to what's happening in Palestine. So please.